All right, what is up, guys? This is the second episode of the Real Life Podcast, and I'm your host, Tyler Olrogue. Today, we're going to nerd out a little bit. For those of you that don't know, I actually have a degree in fisheries biology, and so today we're going to be talking with Native Fly WNY for Western New York, a boy by my own heart. I guess his real name is Kyle Glenn. I didn't know people didn't go by their Instagram handles. That's usually what people call me. But we're going to be talking about some research that he's been working on. I want to get some more specifics from him, kind of ask him some questions, get a feel. I was really interested in it. I think the basics of it is that he is doing Goby Steelhead interactions. So I'm going to get him in this call, and then hopefully we will have some questions. I'll let him introduce himself, but I'm gonna send him the old invite. What's on, man?
Hey, man. Sorry. Getting the whole thing set
How's
up
it going?
weird.
Yeah. How's it going? Nice to officially meet you.
Yeah. I think I talked to you 4 months ago or something about the Thai Nesta, and then I just lost connection.
Yeah, no, that's more than all right. So you want to give folks a quick introduction? I'm curious, are you kind of some locations and stuff, but just a background on you first, and then we'll get into your study and stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Kyle. I'm a undergrad at Buffalo State, but I've been doing research since freshman year, with gobies and macroinvertebrates and various other projects that they have me working on for the last 4 years. And then I'm thinking of doing my graduate school either at Michigan State or continue on at Buff State with their GLEAS program. They have a great program, so I think I might just stay there. But besides that, I just fish a lot in the area and just really like gobies, I guess.
That's good. That's how most of us get into it. So
Yeah.
you're studying at Buff State? You're in your fourth year,
Yeah.
and what is your official major?
It's biology, but concentration and aquatics. So
Okay,
lots
right
of
on.
fish.
So I wanted to get into your study because it just jumped out at me. I saw you posted your lecture
Yeah.
shotguns and gobies. Just got me excited, and I'm ready to nerd out a little bit and ask you some questions.
Hey, man, that's what it's all about.
That's true. So first, I just kind of wanted to know what specifically you're looking at. You're looking at steelhead goby interaction, correct?
Yeah, so that was the initial aim of the project, and then COVID hit, and
Yeah.
funding changed, everything changed. So it turned out to just be a summer project of reevaluating streams that have community assessments on them 15 years ago, and we wanted to see what they were present day. And that kind of got my gears turning. I'm like, well, we're shocking all these streams. I see steelhead in them too. I wonder if there's a correlation between the increased amount of gobies and that everyone's saying just through observational studies that the steelhead fishery has been booming ever since the goby was introduced, and no one really addressed in the creek what are their interactions. So that's what I want to get into in grad school, but I got a lot of preliminary work out of the way with just kind of doing surveys on each of the creeks as of right now. So,
Of course. And so I was curious, what tributaries exactly have you been surveying? Lake Erie tribs, I believe, Buff State.
Yeah,
But
only
what specific creeks are you actually doing?
So we surveyed 4. We were supposed to survey 8, but then everything got slashed with budget cuts. So we did 18 Mile, Silver Creek, Walnut Creek, and Big Sister, I believe. And the interesting thing that we learned, and Canada Way. So if any one of the viewers know where that is, all great steelhead fisheries. But
I know exactly what those are.
yeah, and the other unfortunate thing that happened during survey was we had the drought this year. So all of our sampling efforts were in late July, early August, and some of the smaller trips that we wanted to survey, like beaver, derby, mud, and all like those smaller, like Little Canada Way, they
Yeah.
literally had no water. You couldn't even run a Serber sample through them. So
Yeah.
it took away a lot of the statistical analysis from the study because we only had 4 streams. So it really kind of put a damper on everything.
You'll find that that's how research goes sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
So just kind of into your funding and supporting, who specifically is funding and supporting your project?
So for the last project and the projects I've done in the past, it was all funded through the SUNY Research Foundation. And it's basically all like stipends. And if you need materials, you can ask for another check for more materials. But all I really needed was a pair of hip boots, and I had my waders. So we were okay in that department.
And Buff State had the electrofishing equipment, or did you have to borrow that from DEC?
Yeah, they had everything. Because little known fact about Buffalo State, they're a great aquatics college, and they house, it's called the Great Lakes Center. It's like another entity that like resides at Buff State, and they do all of the long-term monitoring for all of the Great Lakes. So all of the process of sampling all of the Great Lakes is all done at Buff State. So like more like Dreissena and Quagga mussel studies, and lots of benthic interaction studies. That's all done right on campus, which is pretty cool because I work in that lab too.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I went all the way to Pennsylvania, which is about 2.5 hours away from Buffalo, to get my degree in fish biology, which I know you're an aquatic biology degree, but it's essentially almost the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
And then the other school I looked at was SUNY Cobleskill, which is all the way across, closer to Albany. So it is interesting. I never knew that they had that program, so that's actually really interesting if anyone is interested in that field, that they can go close if they are in Buffalo.
Yeah, and like we're kind of in the mecca of like all the Great Lakes right here. Once I found out they had this program, I didn't apply anywhere else because I really liked the faculty and staff, and they kind of welcomed me, and I've been working for them since freshman year. So it's weird because I'm working with a lot of the grad students, and they're like, when are you graduating grad school? I'm like, well, I'm still a sophomore undergrad. And so it'll be weird doing my grad school there because I've been there for so long and it's so familiar, but that familiarity, it's also kind of nice to have.
Yeah, no, that would be really nice. So what specifically are you looking at with the macroinvertebrates and the gobies? What did you do survey-wise? What kind of is your hypothesis? You said you were comparing 15 years, but what exactly are you comparing?
Okay, so prior to the whole COVID thing, we were supposed to sample all of the fish communities and macroinvertebrate communities of each of the creeks through electroshocking and Serber sampling. We were supposed to do 20 replicates per creek with the Serber sampling. We dropped that down to 5 just because of time constraints. And once we got the macroinvertebrates, I'll start with those first. I took them and I had to ID them all down to genus, and then like species of interest, we went down to species, and that was fun with the chironomids and everything. Mm-hmm. And just a lot of keen basically was most of my summer work.
Did you have to pick the bugs yourself from the sample?
Yeah, so every you know what a Serber sampling device is, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what it is.
So
I also know what a pain it is to pick all the bugs out of one of the samples.
Yeah, I went in there with a toothbrush and then got all those, and then I had to, because like you got so much detritus and everything in your samples too, you had to pick through all of that. Then we had to lutriate it, and then we finally got to break them down to order, and then genus, and then the ones for species or species. But it was a long process.
Yeah, it's a long process.
And
people are not going to understand. It's super long.
Yeah, and it's a one-man show here too, so I had no help. But yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, but I just want to point out that is just such a terrible process. That's a lot of hard work. But so you were looking for the macros. identifying down the species, and then what were you doing from there?
So from there, we just got counts. We did EPT richness, and then total stream abundance and total stream richness. And we had a slight error in the fact that our statistical analysis was skewed because we had 4 creeks, and one of them had a difference I'll talk about later, and the 3 others were all the same. So we couldn't even run like an ANOVA or a t-test.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it was like observational studies basically on the results. But the one really interesting outcome that we've noticed is because like the trend in the last 5 years was like rising lake levels in Lake Erie and Lake Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
In one creek, Silver Creek, we found gobies above an impassable barrier, but because of the rising lake levels, it's no longer impassable. So that was
Mm-hmm.
like the major find of the study basically. But that means that potential steelhead could utilize those in Silver Creek, which is more of a nutrient poor stream, very, very healthy system. But by having gobies in there, it just adds another food source, basically. So I don't know if
So,
positive or
yeah.
negative right now, but yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So, what's kind of the background of the goby? When were they introduced, and what did you find specifically with your study? Did the gobies increase over the last 15 years? So they would, I'm guessing the survey was somewhere around 2005 when you're comparing to.
Yeah.
Yep. Did you at least find an increase since then in that data when you compared the two?
Well, we ran into the same problem they had in 2005 in that some streams did not respond well to the electrofishing device. And
Mm-hmm.
you could see thousands of gobies on the stream bottom,
Mm-hmm.
but we can only collect 2 or 3 at a time. But in general, there is an increase in goby colonization in all of the streams. And to answer your first question there, I believe, I don't have the exact year, but I think it was 70s or the 80s when the gobies were introduced into the Great Lakes.
Yeah, it was like released on like a village system, so I assume that was back when there was still
Yeah,
some commercial.
it's in my introduction. I can look it up real quick.
I knew it was back then sometime. I had some, so I did a little bit of some research stuff myself, and so it said there's some positive and negatives. You know, with anything, there's positives and negatives to an introduction of an invasive species. Well, there's not always positives with invasive species, but there is with the goby.
Yes.
And some of those positive effects that I found was that they're a food source for native fishes. That includes smallmouth bass, walleye, and trout, which would include steelhead. And because they've also been a food source, they've also declassified some species as endangered, which includes the Lake Erie water snake.
Yes. Yes.
And so this is more going with your graduate kind of hypothesis. But when you look at these species, the smallmouth bass, the walleye, and the trout, with Lake Erie specifically, like you're looking at one of the best walleye fisheries in the world. You're looking at probably a good top smallmouth bass fishery in the world. I don't know if you can say it's one of the greatest steelhead fisheries in the world.
Yeah, that's debatable.
But there's definitely been some success as a result of the goby. Oh, and the other positive thing that I failed to mention was that they readily feed on the zebra mussel, which is also an invasive species. So how, I guess my question is how do you see the positives here? And I will get into the negatives later. But how is the goby almost been a good thing for Western New York and for Lake Erie?
Like you said, it kind of brought back a lot of our major game fisheries, and a lot of the anglers are very happy about that because we are seeing like average yield of like fish is increasing, and also like the average size of fish is increasing as well. But cool thing about the goby is that it's also shifting, and this is what I want to really get into with my research. It's shifting the
Mhm.
feeding habits of steelhead in both the pelagic zone and in like the stream environments as well. So I can't remember where I heard it from, but there were studies done with goby and lake trout, and there's actually evidence that since the introduction of the goby, the lake trout are switching to more of a benthic feeding pattern. So like they're going down for their food now because that's where the calories are compared to alewives that are uh, decreasing in population. So I wanted to see if there was like a similar kind of correlation with that with steelhead. But in the stream, another positive of the goby is that every year they spawn multiple times in the springtime, and they have it's called the drift effect of their larval, uh, the larval gobies, and those are actually my hypothesis is that they're being utilized by the juvenile steelhead and smolt, and like because it's like basically a free little calorie packet that doesn't even move that you can just
Mhm.
eat readily, and there's millions of them that come down creeks. So that was the other thing I wanted to do were drift sampling and drift surveys of the larval gobies. And in terms of another positive I just thought of is um, I was just through observational studies asking if English are seeing gobies this time of year in the fall. And usually we get like a false run of emerald shiners in the fall that the steelhead chase up creek sometimes. But
Mhm.
gobies are now their possible food source instead of the shiners. So it might increase shiner populations, which may, having a larger biomass of shiners will then also create a higher food source in the lake for the steelhead to feed on more shiners in the lake. So there'll be more shiners available, basically. So it kind of
Yeah, no,
shifts
yeah,
everything.
it's really interesting how it really does impact. And like I have the frustration when I hear people want to bring back stuff. Like I live in Colorado now, and people want to bring back the wolf. They want to reintroduce wolves, which has been successful in, I guess, in Montana and Yellowstone. It's been successful, but and then there's even crazy theories like genetically bringing back like a mammoth because it's good for like some of the grasses in the Everglades or something like that.
Yeah.
But these things, like, and this is a perfect example of is shifting the feeding things. Now, I can't necessarily say that it's good that we're shifting the steelhead feeding patterns. I think that's yet to be determined. But these things do change over time when you do have a single thing being added or removed from an ecosystem, and things adapt to them so rapidly that you can't just put something back or even at this point just take something away.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And the funny thing is, like, even steelhead and rainbow trout in general are naturalized species. They're not even like native. So a
Yeah.
lot of people they always say, "Oh, the native steelhead." It's like, well, they've been here a while, but
They're not native.
yeah. So
Yeah, and that does frustrate. So like I was born and raised in Springville, and so we have the Springville Dam removal project that
yeah,
they're trying to do, which I actually voiced an opinion. Uh, I hosted IF4 Film Fest. We had some technical difficulties, and I ended up having to do like a stand-up routine.
hmm
And someone from the crowd asked me my thoughts on the dam removal, and I said, well, I think it's stupid because we're prioritizing these steelhead and there's tributaries upstream that still have native brook trout,
exactly.
and and that should 100 and that's specifically for anybody that supports Trout Unlimited. To say that you're for the dam removal project goes completely against the mission statement of Trout Unlimited.
Yeah, to protect and preserve native species. So yeah, that's
Exactly.
sticky.
But talking about the Springville Dam, I did want to ask you this question, and I didn't know if you have the answer to this. I don't necessarily expect you to, but I just want to get your thoughts. So with the Springville Dam project, if they do open that up and steelhead are able to pass upstream of that dam, would that open that area up to gobies?
Yes.
So they are migrating that far up into rivers. They're not just hanging out at the bottom.
Yeah, there are multiple other creeks in the area that they go up to the first waterfall. So they would be in the entire upper Cattaraugus Creek watershed. It might take a
Which
few
is,
years for the colonization to occur,
yeah.
but to some degree we will find them, especially since Cattaraugus Creek is such a large system too. Some
Yeah.
of the smaller Erie tributaries, they only go up the first quarter mile, and then it becomes all shale. But all they're doing, the Gobies, is they're following habitat. They're not following necessarily like a distance of like how far they'll colonize. If there's suitable habitat, you'll find Gobies. And the entire upper Cattaraugus Creek watershed is prime Goby habitat too, which is unfortunate.
What specifically, and because I worked on the Gobi project that I'll get into later, but I asked one of the biologists I was working with, what is specifically the habitat that gobies prefer?
They like medium-sized cobble and like woody debris, basically. And
Yeah, so just mostly structure.
yes, just
relatively big structure.
yeah. They don't do great on shale, and they don't do great in sand. So
Which is actually interesting because a lot of the Erie trips are that shale
yeah,
type stream. But I mean, and when you're talking about that's their habitat, if they were to get up above the dam into those, those wild brown trout fisheries, there's wild rainbows up there, there's native brook trout up there. Everything you just mentioned, habitat-wise, is habitat for recruitment of those browns and rainbows and brook trout when they spawn.
yes,
And that's my same argument with steelhead, is if you do get successful spawn, which is going to be, in my opinion, is going to be very limited regardless. But recruitment of fishes that will impact the native, I almost said native browns. Browns are also invasive.
the naturalized wild browns, I guess.
Yeah, the naturalized wild browns. You're impacting areas. You're taking away areas where those wild fish could recruit. And that's the same for the goby, it sounds, and that could be pretty devastating to the upper Cattaraugus system.
Yeah, it's a huge toss-up because yes,
Yeah.
you're incorporating this huge calorie source in addition to all of like the steelhead eggs, obviously, probably fish that die when they come and spawn. So like the nutrient input up in the upper system will be insane. But you also have to think it's a thriving fishery as it is right now. And
Yeah.
I feel like it will change a lot in characteristic and also angling practices too. I mean, I could get into that. That would be another hour and a half. But yeah, like in terms of like actual like gobies interacting with brook trout, one thing I'm not sure is their temperature range. So I wonder if different colder tributaries would kind of act as like a thermal barrier to the goby. But I'm pretty sure they're pretty adaptable, which is unfortunate. Because we find them a lot in the winter. Like when we do other goby work, we're usually electroshocking in the wintertime around January. So it doesn't look good in terms of that front.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so with that, I wanted to get into some of the negatives that I found in my research. This is very brief compared to any research that you've done, so forgive me. But then some of the negative effects are you have reducing populations of native fish species. They compete specifically with sculpins, darters, and log perch. They compete for the same food source, but they can also eat all three of those and use them as a food source. And these are, we see the positives are with your major sport fish, with your smallmouth, with your walleye, and with your steelhead. And these tend to be the fish that don't get as much press, and does anyone really care if the log perch goes extinct? But where they should care is what I worked on in Pennsylvania, and we were working, and this was really interesting. This is actually the coolest thing I've probably ever done as a tech, as a biologist. We were working, I personally worked with the fisheries management department, But this project was threefold with the Fisheries Management Department of Pennsylvania, the Fish Hatchery Department, and the Fish Health Department, because these darters and even log perch, I don't know if they were in the creek, but darters and log perch are host species for freshwater mussels. And so this stream, it was French Creek, we were surveying, has gobies in it, but it also has good populations of darters, and LaBeouf Creek, which is a tributary of French Creek. There's darters and there's also freshwater mussels. So we were actually looking to harvest darters in order to take to the hatchery to be host species for the mussels, because they were going to start cultivating mussels in the hatchery, because the gobies also feed on the mussels, which is they feed on the zebra mussels, and they actually prefer that, from what I found, to those other fish species. And so they're actually endangering 29 29 mussel species in French Creek, which that impacts water quality and a whole slew of things. I'm not a mussels scientist, otherwise I'd win all kinds of awards, because that's who always wins the awards. But that's just some of the negatives. And I don't believe that we have too many freshwater mussel populations in Western New York. But where do you see the importance of the sculpin, the darters, the log perch kind of in our Western New York fisheries?
So it's interesting when you said that the gobies, they facilitate, I'm guessing you're mentioning like larval darters and sculpins and log perch. Because it's been a number of years, and my professor, he never found like a larval fish in a gut content analysis. So that's
really
interesting. So I wonder if it's different in French Creek, but I think for the most part they're not really eating those species. But I mean, you don't know, because of gut content analysis, they digest food very quickly. And
yeah, well, and I don't know either. This was research I did on the internet. I was trying to use scientific resources, but I could have found misinformation. So that'd be actually really interesting if they didn't actually eat them.
Yeah, they I know for a fact they wreak havoc on our native amphipods. And for a species, or a survey that was done in Ellicott Creek, about 10 years ago, there were like barely any amphipods left when gobies really started infiltrating the system in the higher like areas of the watershed. And what we've actually seen is, since the gobies have been around for now 10, 12 years, this was going back 2 years ago for this, when I looked into this, we saw that the, sorry, I got distracted, there was something outside. We saw that the actual amphipods were making a comeback, and that the gobies were switching their preference in macroinvertebrate food sources. And we also saw an increase once again in rainbow darters as well. And we've been seeing more and more log perch in the system. So, you know,
that throws away everything I just said. That's okay with me.
But it's, a lot of it's, observational studies, because, we're just electroshocking, and we've noticed that there were like, wow, there's a lot of darters here competed with like 7 years ago. But I don't know if we have any actual statistical analysis to back that up, but it was just kind of an interesting aside.
For those that aren't scientific as scientific savvy as you and I, what is an amphipod?
Okay, an amphipod is, I guess we're talking to a mainly fly fishing audience here. It's like your guds. So like your sow bugs and basically freshwater shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually an invasive amphipod that, I mean, that's in Lake Ontario, but it's also in some of the Lake Erie watersheds too, that the goby has been removing. So once again, it's an invasive species removing an invasive species. So
yeah, this is the same with the zebra mussel. I guess the problem really comes in is when you have those native mussel species like French Creek does. And French Creek actually runs into Allegheny, which also has different mussels and stuff. I think that's where it starts to become problematic, and where you do see these benefits from them for sure, but you also do have these negatives. And I guess the question is where do you draw the line with that?
Yeah, I had a question for you on that actually. When they said the gobies were preying on them, I'm assuming like when they're like 8 to 10 millimeters, like the juvenile native mussels.
I don't have an answer for that
Oh, okay.
question.
Because
I would assume that they take advantage of them when they're most vulnerable. But I don't have an answer for that. It's just
yeah, because like a lot of when I envision native mussels, I'm thinking of like like those ones that look like oysters almost in the creek
yeah,
that you see. But I'm sure as soon as they get to that like preference size by gobies, like they'll wreak havoc on those populations. That's kind of scary to think about because then you have the whole Susquehanna system, or what you said, Allegheny system, right?
yeah, the Allegheny, which is huge.
Yeah, so that could be devastating.
Yeah, it could be very bad. So kind of with more of the macro and the goby thing, I did find a paper by Hinoto et al. Oh, this is actually out of Buff State.
Yep, that's my professor. That's Dr. Panuto.
Perfect. All right, sounds good. So you know about this, but so they found a negative impact on benthic macros in lakes, but streams may be equally at risk. Is this something that is this the specific study you were following up on, where you're trying to find an impact on the in-stream macros?
Depending on what year he published that, I may have helped on that project. I can't quite remember because I do.
That's why you're supposed to write down the date when you cite stuff, but I didn't do that, obviously.
Yeah. So in terms of like the in-stream macros, that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I believe he found out that the gobies, they're deterred by some of natural chemical compounds found in the riffle beetles. So we've noticed in goby strewn areas, there's these amazing riffle beetle populations. It's just aquatic beetle larvae. Sorry, that's my friend Josh. He's
The comments are always fun during live streams.
Yeah, they release like a toxic chemical, and the gobies, they don't eat those. But the gobies, they eat lots of scuds and chironomids. Basically anything that's in the zone of the goby underneath cobble, they'll prey upon.
Which is most macros, really.
Yeah. But like stoneflies and mayflies, if it's presented in a way that they'll eat it. But they kind of like the easy targets of the chironomids and food sources.
They're lazy.
Yeah, basically.
So this is interesting because you kind of already answered this question, but so I was going to ask how that would impact specifically the steelhead kind of in their recruitment state. Obviously that would have a negative impact if you had less macros, but you pointed out that with the drift, which I'm not even going to try to recreate what you said about the drift, but there's actually, while they're taking away some of that food source for the recruitment of the steelhead, they're also putting back a good food source. So if you had to predict an impact on recruitment of steelhead, would you say that it's negligible? Would you say that it's positive? Would you say that it's negative?
I'd have to say, well, that's
hypothesize. I know you can't give me anything. Yeah.
I'd have to say with the amount of gobies, maybe in certain, it would probably vary stream to stream. So streams that have an extremely high goby population, we'll say, hypothetically, I'd say there would be a slight positive in terms of like smolt facilitation, but I don't foresee really any other fish utilizing the drift. Or other like darters and everything, but those are usually the healthier systems in general. So it would be kind of hard to pinpoint where the nutrient is coming from. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm gonna have to figure out. But
No, that's really. I personally, I'm excited. I hope studying, goes better for you with some of the funding and some of the COVID stuff, obviously. But
yeah,
I'm really interested in seeing, and I know it's probably a few years away when you have the results, uh, but I'm really interested in seeing kind of the impact, because there is positives and negatives to the Goby, and I'm really interested in seeing how that interaction with Steelhead specifically is actually, whether it is positive, whether it's negative, whether it's negligible,
I
and do we need to do something to get rid of the Goby? Should we just leave it there? What's the strategy with that? So
that's kind of the depressing thing. I don't think the Gobies are ever going to leave.
no, I understand.
Yeah, but it almost seems like the Gobies are becoming more naturalized into the food webs, though. So I think in terms of like actual steelhead usage of the Goby, I think it's during their fall run when they're just going into the creeks to pack on calories and they're swarming the creek mouths, and by doing so, they're kicking up gobies all along the bottom, and I think that's when, in terms of actual like predation on gobies, I think that's when that occurs. I don't think it happens so much in the wintertime because the gobies are also lethargic and they'll be under rocks. But I think there's like that critical period when everything in the spring or everything in the early fall, the water temperatures are still warm, where the gobies will like scatter more, and I think that's when like steelhead will key in on them, and that's basically in every creek mouth and every Lake Erie tributary. So I think they're like an easier food source to catch than say like a shiner or an alewife or something that would also be in that system. So it's all up in the air, but that's my hypothesis on it, is that the fall is probably the most critical time to study that. Because
And to throw a Goby ball.
yeah, because like in the springtime they're more focused on spawning, and that could bring in a whole different situation with gobies interrupting steelhead spawn. But that's probably a whole different study, and it's
Yeah.
so
From what I'm hearing is there's a lot of research to be done on this still.
yes, yeah.
It sounds good. Very quickly, do you happen to know if gobies have swim bladders? Because sculpins don't have swim bladders.
I dissected enough of them. I should know this. Maybe if Josh is out there, he could throw me a bone here. I'd like
Don't
to.
afraid.
Oh wait, no, they do not, because when you electroshock them, they sink.
Yeah,
So
just like a sculpin.
yeah,
Which does make them vulnerable when in that fall when the steelhead are targeting them, because they can't swim very well. Like a shiner has a swim bladder, it can ascend and descend whenever it wants to, and a sculpin doesn't have that luxury.
mm-hmm. All gobies can do to evade is just dive and hide. But if you're in a sandy environment, say on a creek mouth, there's not too much room for that, so they'll probably just get kicked up and eaten. So
Yeah,
but
sure.
interesting thing about the goby itself, when we do our gut content analysis, you'll find like 30-40 chironomid heads in one goby that's like 3/4 of an inch long. Like, it's amazing the amount of biomass they consume that is unknown from a lot of people. But
yeah, that's pretty sweet. So it sounds like you have a lot of research to do. I am on a time limit. I'm trying to catch the Bills game at 5.
okay, I didn't know what is the time difference between me and you? Is it?
It's almost 5 o'clock here. So the game starts at 7 EST, 5 Mountain Time.
Yep. Okay. Gex, we got 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, no, we can go over if we need to, but
I mean, I guess my question game too. So I mean,
yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah. My question is to wrap up, well, first, where can people find you? Where can people ask questions about the research and kind of all that? specifically through Instagram? Is that where you do most of your communication?
Yeah, I do get a lot of messages, just through Instagram. But if people really want like a more of an in-depth conversation, I can give out my email. Um,
Mm-hmm.
do I just
Go
add
ahead.
that to the chat or something, or how would I do
You
that?
can just say it out loud.
Oh, okay, it's Glenn KR01 at mail.buffalostate.edu. So
2 N's in Glenn.
two N's in Glenn, yes. So
Okay.
not like the actual
Perfect.
Glenn, but
And then, so my final question is, where would you like this project to go? Where would you like your future kind of in this industry, profession, science? Where would you, or where do you see it going?
so ultimately a year ago, I wanted to probably pair up with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, potentially get this funded for my grad school. But with all the COVID cuts on everything, I don't know if that's possible anymore. But it
Mm-hmm.
would be kind of cool for a project like this to then be taken up by like a larger entity and really have more people on it, because so far I think it's just me.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting to see if then you could like use it as a factor when dealing with entire fishery analysis. You could see actual like Goby stream impact rather than just Goby impact, or something like that.
So yeah, well, and everything that I have at least taken away from this conversation is, the main thing that I've taken away, I've learned some stuff, but there's a lot of unanswered questions, and we do need more people answering these
Yeah.
questions. Long term, are these gobies going to have negative impacts, or are they going to have positive impacts? And I think, over time, especially in Pennsylvania and in New York, we're going to start to see invasive species units, just because, and this is completely a hot take,
Yeah.
but I do think we're going to see some invasive species units because it's becoming more prevalent. And they just, like last year, they found snakehead down in the Monongahela River, I believe, in Pennsylvania. What's the Asian carp in the Mississippi? It's
Yeah.
craziness how these invasive species are potentially threatening, our sport fisheries. So I do hope that you get to continue to work on this project, and that you do get some funding and some help, because I know personally, as a fisherman and a biologist and someone that has stake kind of in how those fisheries go, I'm really interested in learning more about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I hope to give you those answers in a few years with everything. It'll be weird because a lot of things, you can't be on campus for, but luckily our labs are open. But you have minimal staff you can have in them and everything, so it'll be really interesting. But I really appreciate you reaching out to me. This is really cool.
Yeah, no, this was fun. I appreciate you coming on. Yeah, this will. I mean, this is obviously live now, and it'll be posted live on Instagram. But then I'll put it up probably Sunday is when I'm doing my podcast posts, so it'll be out then.
Cool.
Yeah, it's time to go watch the Bills.
I know we got 1 minute, so.
All right, sounds good, man. I'm gonna boot you out and do a wrap up. That's okay with you?
All right, sounds good, man.
Yeah, take care. I appreciate you.
All right, see you. Maybe we'll get fishing sometime.
Yeah, I'm hoping to come back to New York sometime soon, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, we need rain though. That's the thing.
I
Desperately.
heard that. I heard that. I had Adam Slavinsky on from Orvis last week.
Yeah, he's great.
So he said the exact same thing. So praying for rain.
Yep. I'm heading to Erie this weekend, so I'm hoping for the best. But
sounds good, man.
Yep. All right. See ya.
See ya. All right, guys, that is going to do it for the second episode of the Real Life Podcast. A lot of unanswered questions when it comes to gobies, at least that I've learned, and some controversy with information, and that's the same with any research project that you do. You're going to have information that clashes with each other, so much more study needs to be done on this. I wish Kyle the best when it comes to his future as a biologist and working on this. I really hope he gets the help that he needs, and funding and support and all that. But like I said, that's going to do it. Go check out Kyle, Native Fly, Western New York, on Instagram, His email's there if you have any more questions on the research, but that's going to do it, and we shall see you next time.